Hey class, it's Mr. Hendrickson. This little video is just an introduction to chapter 1 from the textbook, and the chapter talks a little bit about what can be art. It provides different examples as to this is art or that is art or what can art do, and so you'll find different sections called the power of art too, and then it kind of fills in the blank with some different examples. The power of art to touch our emotions, or the power of art to shock. So there's a variety of sections to look at, but the chapter starts out with the example of the Mona Lisa, which may be the most famous painting in the world. And I'm sitting here with a couple of portraits. I love portraits. To me, they're some of the most exciting works of art in art history. And in my personal work, I love to make portraits. I find people's faces to be fascinating, and so I like a wide variety of faces, and I like all the little subtle nuances that make this person different from that person. Well, when we look at the Mona Lisa, what do we see? Now here's an example image, a replica of the Mona Lisa, and you'll find a similar image in your book, just a reproduction image. And so what we see is just a person who's sitting in front of a landscape. There's a ledge just behind her and a landscape beyond, so it really gives us an idea of height or perspective up above this landscape. But if you look at the landscape, you'll notice that they seem to be a bit different. The left-hand side and the right-hand side don't quite match up. Other details in the image, just on either side of her on the ledge, and it's difficult to see, you might have to look closely. There are a couple little semicircular shapes, and those are believed to be the bottom parts of two columns, one on either side. Now the book says that the painting may have been cut down sometime in its history in order to fit into a frame. I'm not sure if that's quite correct. It doesn't sound right to me. And other experts and historians have said that's not true, that the painting was never cut down. We see her hands folded. There's a little bit of an indication of the arm of a chair. And so what we see is that her body is facing this way, but her head is turned in the opposite direction, or almost the opposite direction. So you get a twisting nature to the body and the figure, and that creates a more dynamic image. Some other things to notice, just a very subtle indication of a line here for a veil, and the subtle smile that you probably heard about, and the subtle shading around the eyes, the nose, the mouth, and just above and below the chin. So those are some things which made the painting so realistic, and the art historian Vasari described the painting in extreme detail, even though he had never seen the painting himself. So at the time that it was made, in about 1503 to 1506, that's an estimate, it was famous. People knew about it. Raphael saw the painting and was influenced by the composition, the way that the figure was set up. And if you look at an example of one of his works, you'll see certainly a connection and influence by the Mona Lisa. So one of the biggest questions is, why is this painting so famous? It's not a famous person. We believe we know who it is, or who it was, the wife of a Florentine silk merchant, but she was not famous by any measure. She was not a queen. She was not someone in the ruling class. She was just sort of an average person. An interesting thing about the commission is that Leonardo never delivered or never fulfilled the commission. So he maintained possession of the Mona Lisa, even though it was commissioned by somebody else. Normally you would expect the painting to be delivered upon completion. Leonardo never saw the painting to be finished, and so perhaps that's why he never delivered the work to the patron. The painting is located in the Louvre, which is the world's largest museum, and it's in Paris, France. The term Louvre means where wolves live, and it was originally built as a palace for the kings of France, but it's built on top of a system of caves where ancient wolf hunters lived. The book talks about the idea that it's a bit disappointing to see the Mona Lisa in person. I've seen it twice, and I can agree with that. It was a bit of a letdown because you really can't get close to it. Kenneth Clark, the famous art historian, called her the submarine goddess of the Louvre because she's in this vault behind glass, and as a viewer you can't get close to it and really look at the surface. So to see the work in the book is probably as good or maybe even better of a view than seeing her in the Louvre. It's protected because in 1911 the painting was stolen. And it's maybe hard to imagine, but before 1911, before the painting was stolen, it was just an average work of art. And to say that, I mean that the painting did not have a special place in the Louvre. It was just on the wall among many other paintings. And it was not the premier work of art in the collection. There were other paintings, other sculptures, which had more fame or acclaim than the Mona Lisa. So in some ways, it was painted by a famous artist, Leonardo, but it was not the famous work that it is today. It became famous because it was stolen. And it's a fascinating story that I want you to look into. Look into why it was stolen and look into who stole it. It was a man who was actually an employee at the museum. So it was an interesting character who decided to take the piece. But I want you to discover why, or find out why he said he took that. And then do you think that's a believable explanation or not? The painting was missing for about 2 years and then was finally recovered in Florence, Italy. Since then it's traveled a few places in Italy, in France, and abroad. But today it's in the Louvre and it's there permanently. So if you want to see the Mona Lisa, you have to go to the Louvre to see it. But as I mentioned before, you might be disappointed. So it's a fascinating story as to why this work is so famous. Once it was stolen, the picture of the Mona Lisa was printed in newspapers throughout the world. So suddenly, seemingly overnight, everyone knew what the painting looked like. You may have heard of it before, but perhaps you've never seen it unless you traveled to Paris. But now it was in newspapers across Europe, in the United States, and across the world once the painting was stolen. So that's really why everyone can recognize the Mona Lisa, because since then the image has been reproduced over and over again, countless number of times, probably the most reproduced image in all of art history. So the story of the Mona Lisa I think is a fascinating one. The painting itself isn't my favorite. I don't think it's the most interesting painting, but the story, the context of the painting I think is fascinating. The rest of chapter 1 deals with, as I mentioned before, examples of what can be art. There are a few things that I want you to highlight. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial, designed by an artist and architect named Maya Lin. She also designed the Civil Rights Memorial, which is in Montgomery. Also want you to look at the power of religious art, and the example is the Cathedral of Notre Dame. And I'll also ask you to study another cathedral called the Sagrada Familia, so look for some content on that. Towards the end of the chapter, talks about how art could be beautiful, or maybe not, and talks about art as creativity. Art needs to be original and creative, and there's some interesting examples, including a work by Pablo Picasso, where he's drawing with light. I think that's a fascinating work. So all in all, make sure that you read chapter 1 in its entirety, but focus on those 4 or 5 things which I really highlighted. Those will be the most important parts of chapter 1.